Yeah, let's get into the show. So like you
Yeah.
mentioned, and I listened to this podcast you did, this post that you wrote about like the top 10 skills on LinkedIn. And you mentioned that, they were the same things that you could have seen in 2012. You could have seen them 10 years ago. But that makes me wonder, like, could you have also seen those 20 years ago? And does that say something about like some level of consistency and foundational skills? Or like, how do you distinguish between things that are like everlasting in terms of skill sets and things that actually should be evolving? Like, should we have new skills every 5 or 10 years?
Well, I mean, it depends on your career. I mean, if you're in accounting or if you're in finance, the world is changing, relatively slowly. Basically, is determined by regulations. In the world of marketing, though, it's being tweaked literally every day, if not every hour. And I do think the necessary skill sets are changing. I think there are fundamental things like learning about consumer behavior and research. Certainly, those are important. But there were things on the list, and I don't have it in front of me right now. I could pull it up if we need to, but it had really nothing on there about content marketing.
Hmm.
It had nothing on there about influence marketing. It had nothing on there about Web3 metaverse, where that is where all the money is going right now. So, what does it say about our industry when it's like they're looking at conversions and SEO and that's the world's moving beyond a lot of that stuff, and the skill sets required to connect as marketers. I mean, it's going to be experiential. Where's experiential where's customer service user interface? It's
Hmm.
not on the list. It's like, what kind of it's almost like an alternate universe for where I see where marketing needs to go and where it still is today. Um, you know, it's sort of weird. I think it represents that many companies and many leaders are really slow to change. In many ways, they're trying to hold on to the old ways. They're trying to hold on to advertising. They're trying to hold on to things that are easier to measure.
Mm-hmm.
And you can either move with the world and keep up with the pulse of our culture, or you can, be comfortable and do your old things and measure the old ways. You can't do both.
Right. This is going to be a grandiose question to kind of start the conversation with, but like, how do you predict future trends? Like, I'm asking for you specifically how you do it, but then like,
Yeah.
The average marketer who's maybe a couple of years into their career, maybe 10 years into their career, like, how do they keep in front of this stuff as well? Like, what kind of information are you consuming? What kind of mental models are you using to move with the world, so to speak?
Well, I'm not sure I can really explain it in terms of how I do it. I mean, I've had a good track record of sort of predicting what's going to happen and what's going to come next, and I realized that it was sort of like not till my 30s. I was a late bloomer trying to figure out what I was good at in this world, but I was in marketing, and when you have conversations with most people, they dwell in the trend that's going on now. Okay. So here's an example: remote work. All right. So now we're in a pandemic and boom, remote work. And then, so you talk about remote work and you're dwelling in the trend of the moment. What I do is, number one, see how trends intersect. So that's one trend, but what about this other trend? How do they intersect? And then I think through, for example, what are the implications? So everybody's talking about remote work, and companies are thinking about, okay, we need to upgrade our technology. Here's what I'm thinking about. Remote work is not going to go away. And when you have more and more people working remotely, then they're going to have special needs. All right. You have IT needs. You might have childcare needs. You might have healthcare needs. You might need food delivered in the middle of the night. So I thought, look, this isn't going away. I predict we are going to have remote working communities, especially some of these old Rust Belt towns. They're going to provide incentives, and they're going to create a hub where you've got 24-hour childcare, 24-hour fitness centers, 24 IT support, 24-hour everything. And I predicted this a year and a half ago. I just on the Wall Street Journal, this is coming true. So that's an example where I just think things through. And then you look at certain areas of the country that need to attract people. And they've got lots of buildings and they've got lots of infrastructure. Maybe they're close to universities, that these are going to be the perfect places to implement these hubs. And so I don't really know. I sort of geek out on trends, and I just think through, oh, okay, well, what does that really mean? If this is true, it's going to stay this way, what's this going to look like in 2 years or 3 years?
No, that's good. I think because it seems like you start with something grounded in the current reality. Like there's some sort of fundamental human behavior shift or consumer behavior shift. And then it sounds like you apply some lens to predict what problems that shift is going to bring up, right? And then those problems to be solved are interesting opportunities. And that's where the trends lie with regards to marketing techniques or new businesses to be launched. But you're not...
an example, probably my most famous example, and some people thought it was controversial, was I wrote an article in 2014 called Content Shock. And this was like the height of everybody's getting into content marketing. And, I know you were at HubSpot, and that was the heydays of HubSpot. But if you think it through, it's not sustainable, because if you start getting too much of anything in a human system, in a natural system, in an economic system, something's got to give. Something's got to change. People are producing more and more content. The niches will fill up. That means you've got to spend money either on promotion or on quality to compete.
Mm-hmm.
Then your competitors do the same thing, and it becomes an arms race. Some people will win, and some people are not going to be able to compete. And so content marketing is not going to be sustainable for everybody in the long term. This happened to me. I used to be a contributor to the Harvard Business Review, and they're very, very picky. So I would get maybe 1 out of every 3 or maybe 4 of my submissions. They would say, yeah, this is great. We're going to put it in there. And then over time, it was like 1 out of 5, 1 out of 7, 1 out of 10. And I asked the editor, what's going on? And she said, well, executives have learned it's great to be in the Harvard Business Review. They've got content firms and ad agencies creating custom articles for them to submit to the Harvard Business Review. Mark, the stuff you're turning into us would have been accepted 3 years ago. But how are you going to compete with these professional agencies creating custom content for these executives? The answer is, I can't. It's not competitive. It's not sustainable for me. I dropped out. Mm-hmm. That's not to say I couldn't try submitting again someday, but that's where more and more content was getting better and better and better at a higher and higher price that me as a small business, I couldn't compete with. Now, who benefits? The readers.
Mm-hmm.
The readers benefit from the content arms race. That's why, one of the greatest shows, one of the breakthrough shows of the history of television was Game of Thrones. $10 million an episode, right? Unbelievable. Mandalorian, $15 million an episode, right? Next year, we'll probably see something that's $20 million an episode. Right now, Netflix on the ropes. They don't have those deep pockets to compete like that. Amazon does, Disney does, Apple does. And so even in that sort of content to cut through, you got to have deep pockets in the long term. And that's not to say that there still aren't niches and there aren't opportunities. But from a mega trend perspective, it's harder and harder and harder to compete and cut through.
Do you think that is inevitable in the life cycle of a channel or a tactic, something that works, so to speak? Like people are going to jump on and see that, they're going to get data that proves that it's working. Their competitors are going to jump in, and it hits the saturation.
The pattern repeats over and over again. So, in some of my speeches, I talk about the history of media channels, starting with TV. In the early days of TV, basically anybody could be on TV. You could go down to the state. They needed content. They were hungry for content. You could go down and do a cooking show. You could do a variety show. You could sponsor any program because it was new and it was cheap. And then it became popular. And they had more TV stars, better production. And here we are with The Mandalorian, $15 million an episode. I went to a conference a few years ago. This is when Snapchat was new. They said, oh my gosh, it's so hard to cut through on Facebook or, YouTube, but Snapchat, it's amazing. People see your content and you get all this engagement. In the back of my mind, I'm saying that's not sustainable. As Snapchat becomes more popular, as TikTok becomes more popular, as Twitch becomes more popular, it's harder and harder to cut through just because of the economic realities of competition.
Mm. When you say it's not sustainable, though, is there a case to be made that there's some form of arbitrage when you get in early and you can maybe sustain some cumulative advantage by building up the audience when it's not as competitive? So take for search, for example, HubSpot getting in early and playing tons of long tail, content. They basically spread across, they rank for every keyword now. And their domain rating's so high that if you try to compete with them, it's very hard because they've got this moat built up. But they were kind of early on that. So is there maybe a case to be made jumping in early and really scaling it out while it's still fresher?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's the only strategy. The only strategy is, it's shock and awe. If you find a niche, you fill it up and dominate. Content shock is the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You want to own a niche and dominate a niche so completely that your competitors will never be able to touch you, which is exactly what HubSpot did. It's not necessarily good for business or for the world, but that's how the algorithms work.
Right. And you mentioned that personal brand was a sort of moat that you had built out for yourself, and that makes you less worried about, the content shock that's going to be derived from these AI copywriting tools. So maybe that's some emergent property that stays with you across channels over time.
So that's the only option that most businesses have today, is that, the moats are built, they're unassailable. We're moving into a post-SEO world. What I mean by that is, let's say 10 years ago, I'm a digital marketing consultant. If I really hammered it out, could I, make some progress on search results for digital marketing consultant? Maybe. Today, I've written 10 books. I teach at a university. I studied under Peter Drucker. I've blogged for 10 years. I've had a podcast for 10 years. I've won all these awards. Will I win SEO for digital marketing consultant? No, never. Ain't gonna happen. So I've got to do something else. I can't rely on that, because the only people that are going to win are the meanest, richest junkyard dogs in the industry. And they're going to be battling each other out forever for those top 3 slots on search. I can't do that. So I have to rely on authority. I've got to create content that's so interesting, so unique, so unmissable. People will say, I'm going to subscribe to him. I'm going to opt in to him because I love what he does. I don't want to miss a single thing. And at that point, you don't need Google anymore. And that's where the world has to go. is to create content that's so interesting, unmissable, and entertaining that people opt into you, and you don't have to depend on all the money you're putting into search.
Yeah, this may be a poor metaphor, but I'm thinking about like product versus distribution. And there's like saturated distribution channels like SEO where you're competing head to head, and it's probably very expensive at this point. There's paid acquisition, and depending on what industry you're in, it might be the same thing. And then there's new channels,
right.
And all of these are ways that you can discover new audiences can discover your work. But the work itself has to be a product worthy of its own right. And that's kind of like you're just using these channels to get people to you and like creating something so good that they're willing to follow you. You're building brand equity, and you're building something that lasts over time. Is that maybe right to say?
No, I think you're exactly right.